Hello, grade 12. We're going to do our PAT 2021. This is the scenario. The scenario is a community non-profit organization, so you have to write a program for that scenario. We're going to start with the basics. Basically, what is a non-profit? We know what that is. I'm going to use a fete as an example, like a school fete. Maybe you want to write a program to record all of the stalls that will be available and the people working on the stalls. Is just an example of a program that we can use. There's lots of other examples that they give here, so you can choose. And now obviously we're going to need to create a database for our fete. A fete is like a fundraising activity where you have different stalls to sell different items. Now I've started working on the tables for this, and you'll see that I have created a table called stall and one called volunteer. We'll call them volunteers because it's a non-profit. So in the stalls we'll have a stall name and what kind of type that stall is, whether it's selling food or clothing or plants or other items, and then quantity of stalls. Maybe we have 2 candy floss stalls or 2 pie stalls, but I'm not sure whether we're going to use quantity there. Maybe we don't need to. We'll get into more detail. So just remember that for every table, a stall table must only have items about that stall. Descriptions. What kind of descriptions can we give to a stall? Can be whether it needs to be covered, must it be indoors or outdoors? So maybe this one needs to be indoors. We can have a Boolean data type here, whether it's going to be inside, yes or no. I can use the word inside. So your area where you're going to have your fete could have rooms or buildings, and also could be you can have stalls outside. So we'll go in more detail on that one. And then for a volunteer, well, obviously we can have an ID, some kind of you have to have a primary key for each of your tables. So you have to have 2 tables at least, and they must be related. And we're going to see just now how we can connect the 2 tables. But first of all, you make a table for the one item, one kind of like the stall, and another table for the people who work at the stall. This is just an example. So we'll have a work ID. I'm going to have a primary key, so either an ID number, which will be a string, and we know that everybody's ID numbers are different, so that's also a good primary key for volunteer table. And then we can have surname, first name. This is going to be a yes/no field, whether the person's a leader or not. And this could be the date of birth, or you could put in the age here. Now this work ID could be an auto number, but maybe we don't need to have the date of birth. We just can put in age, and that would be an integer. And yeah. So this work ID is going to be an auto number, I've decided. A surname and a first name, whether they're leader of the stall or not. Because remember, the volunteers are going to work at a stall, and the chief organizer or leader will be the one in charge of that stall. And then that chief organizer or leader will get more volunteers, and whether they're leader or not, we'll record all the types of volunteers for a particular stall. Now, how does the stall table relate to the volunteer table? Well, you ask yourself a question. You're actually going to think of a story, the scenario of your fete. We're going to say one stall, you pretend you one stall can have many volunteers, not so? That is true. So we can go and put a a little 1 here. Pretend you're standing at the stall table and you start off with 1. Okay, so one stall can have how many volunteers? Many, not so. One stall can have many volunteers, so I'll put an N there, N for many. Then you pretend you are a volunteer, and one volunteer, so you stand at the volunteer table and you think about it. Okay, if I'm one volunteer, how many stalls can I work at? Well, if the answer is many, in other words, you can have shifts. So you work at one stall and then you work at another one after that, after an hour. So you go and move between the different stalls, which is more than likely the case because we sometimes don't have enough people. That means that we're going to have a many-to-many table. But let's just keep it simple. If we said one volunteer, for starters, can only work at one stall for the whole day of the fete, then what we're left with is a one-to-many relationship. Now, this is the simplest kind of relationship that you can have for your PAT. And if it's a one-to-many relationship, then we've got to put a foreign key on the many side. The many side. And what is the foreign key? The foreign key will be, we borrow the primary key field and we duplicate it and put it on the many sides. So what is the primary key field of the stall table? So we get the primary key from the stall table. We haven't got a primary key here. Stall name, yeah, but some people could have duplicate stall names, so it's not a very good one. So we'll have an auto number here as well. So we call it stall ID. Stall ID will be our primary key on the stall table, and we'll make it the foreign key over here on the volunteer table. Now you don't actually need capital letters when you put in your table names or your field or column names, but you need to know that that is the primary key of that table. Oops, sorry. And this is the foreign key, but this is the primary key of the volunteer table. And here we have the foreign key, which we borrowed from that table. And then the relationship is formed, and you're going to drag. We'll show you just now how we do that in the actual database, but you're basically going to drag, wait, not that one. Sorry, my bad. You're going to basically join those two together in a one-to-many relationship. So that is how you work out what your relationship diagram is going to look like in your database. But what if we had the other scenario where one volunteer will work at many stalls, so that's an N there, and then we're going to have a many-to-many relationship, and that's not going to work for us at all. You will then have a many-to-many relationship, and you're not allowed to have a many-to-many relationship in your database, because then your database could crash. It's not going to be a very well designed database, could cause problems when you run your program, when you connect to it and want to do everything with it. So you have to use a different scenario. If you're going to have a many-to-many, okay, these ones are gone, okay. What is the many-to-many? It is one stall can be worked with many volunteers, and one volunteer can work on many stalls. So then you have a situation there. Our story is now that one stall can have many volunteers, and one volunteer can work at many different stalls during the day. So then we have to do something completely different. We're going to delete all of this, and we're going to put in a new table in the middle here, and we're going to give it a new name. So you've got to add a new table in the middle like that. This is very simple to do, And what are we going to call it? I'm going to call it the work table, for want of a better word. Work. Now this work ID is the primary key of the volunteer table. I'm going to call it vol ID, for want of a better name. Now what do we put in this work table? Well, you're going to put the store ID field there inside the work table, and you're going to put the vol ID there, the primary key from the other table, put it in there, and both of them are going to be primary keys, and both of them are going to be foreign keys as well. So there you have it. And then you're going to join the tables like that. That's going to be a 1, 1, and that's going to be a many side. So you now have this scenario where this is the one side and this is the many side. So we're going to join one. Remember, the foreign key is always on the many side of a table. We're going to put the other, we're going to join the other relationship over there, one to many, and there you have your completed database relationship diagram. But you might think, well, we just got these foreign keys here, primary keys we borrowed from the other tables, but our one to many, but what's going to be underneath here? What other fields, in other words, should we put in our work table? Well, you can put start time, in other words, the start time that the person worked at a particular stall, the start time, and then you can put an end time as well. You know, like for instance, Joe will work at the candy floss stall at 8 o'clock, and then and he'll work for 2 hours. So at 10 o'clock he will move to another stall. We will work, you know, let's say the duration, the time. So we can have a start time. We could have things like what is he going to do? Is he going to sell the candy floss, or is he going to make it? In other words, function. Is he just packing? Is he selling? Is he working with the money? Because you remember that when you have a couple of people working on a stall, like making pancakes, are they going to bake the pancakes? You can't have someone making the pancakes. You have to, and selling at the same time. You have to have one person making, the other one selling. So that could be the function. So Joe could be at the pancake stall, you know, and then his function there would be to sell the pancakes, and then he will go and move to another stall, let's say the garden stall, where he will be packing the plants or watering the plants, or maybe at a game stall like a slide or a bouncy castle, where his function could be to do work, you know, look after the children. So as you can see, this work table can then be, you can add different data via more intricate functions and descriptions of what, in other words, this volunteer is going to be doing at that store. So you'll have many volunteers, and what will they be doing at each store. So that is how that works. And if you want to do that as your database, then that's fine. And that is a little bit more complex, but we will work on the simpler one. But I wanted to show you that how easy it is to have 3 tables in a one-to-many relationship. So what we're going to do is we're going to work on our 2 tables only. So your PAT obviously has to start with your database. You can't do anything else. Has to be with your database to start off with. Right, so open Access, blank database, and then straight away you don't just go and click create, you have to go over here to this little folder and go navigate to a place on your computer where you're going to save your database. I'm doing this on my desktop, so right. And we're going to call it a name here, but before you do that, you've got to save it as an MDB file. And the reason for that is it's a 2002-2003 format. So we have to change the name there to .mdb. I'm going to call it the School Fate or Fate. Call it whatever you want. Don't use the same names as me or anything, because that's going to be illegal. You may not copy directly from anybody. You have to use your own words and own initiative and own ideas. So I'm just giving an example here for guidance. So now we have our database done, but when you open Access and you create your database, you haven't finished yet until you've got all your tables sorted out. Now there is always a default table here, and that is because the database program does not exist without at least one table, so it'll always be opened with a table. So I'm going to go and edit this table. We'll go to the Home tab, and I'm going to go to View and Design View, and then they're telling me to save it first. Now I remember that I'm going to use the scenario with 2 tables only, not the 3 tables, because I know that'll be a bit complicated for you, but you can do that if you wish. So I'm going to call this the stall table, and I've called it a stall, and now I'm going to put in all the fields that I did. Over here we have stall ID, stall name, stall type, and inside or outside. So you did that, call it stall ID. Keep it as auto number because it's much easier to work with that. Stall name, and then stall type. Now just remember, when you're doing this, make sure that you know it's going. These are strings, and short text is a string. I'm going to change that to a little bit more manageable. Let's make it 70 characters. I know that's a bit long, but stall type can be 50 characters. 255 will take too much space on the hard drive, so better to make your field properties smaller for the field size. If you look at the bottom here, you'll see. And then what is the other one? It is inside or outside. Well, that's a Boolean, or should I say a yes or no, or true or false data type. So I'm putting that there. Finish that one. Close it. Say yes to save changes. So we've got one table. How do we get another table? Go to Create and Table, and go to Home tab, and then go to View, Design View. What are we going to save it as? Okay, I'm going to call it, volunteer. I was going to use worker because it's easier. Right, vol ID. I'm going to keep that as auto number. I'm actually going to use full name, and then, or maybe we can use surname here. Surname and first name. Don't use the word name. Just use very descriptive field names, because Access sometimes causes a problem. Don't use the word type, and don't use the word name or type. I found that Access is very fussy sometimes. Then we have leader and age. So we have leader and then age. Well, leader is a yes or no, and don't forget I must change these. I wonder if there's any surnames that are longer than 50 characters. Well, let's hope not. Leader is not a short text. It is a yes/no field. And age, we're going to make that a number, which is an integer. You can keep it as long integer, it's fine. And your leader is a yes/no field. So we got those two, fine. But we haven't joined them yet. Before we join them, let's go and have a look at our database tools and relationships. So you go to database tools, relationships. Let's go and put those tables in there so long. So you click on the table, add, select a table, click on the other one, add. So you have it here. It's like a diagram that we use. Now, it looks very similar to what we had before, doesn't it? Before I put all of this stuff in here. Remember, I joined stall ID and I made stall ID over here, and I put stall ID there as my field for my one-to-many, because one stall has many volunteers. We're not going to let volunteers in this scenario that I'm going to use for our program. I'm not going to have a three-table database. We only have two, so I know I must have one stall can have many volunteers, and one volunteer will only work at one stall. So we have a simple one-to-many relationship, and therefore I know that volunteer is the many side, so I must go and get stall ID and put it on the many side. So let's do that quickly. I've just got a bit of an issue here. Okay, I will sort that out later. I hope you can see all of this. Anyway, well, I've got to go and put another field on the okay, if I can't see, this is quite a good educational opportunity, really, when I think about it, because you cannot see, it's very small. So in order to make the words of the names larger, you can go to File and Options, and there should be an area where we can change our size. Initials, background, screen type, okay, fine. Current database. Don't display lists. Data sheet, size. Okay, well, they've got a size there. That's not, that's the font, yes, default font. I think that's not going to, that's just the data sheet view. That's not our, there we go. Query design, okay, query design, I can change that there. I can change, that's when you run queries, or when you type the queries. And that's client settings. As you can see, I haven't done this much. I haven't done this often. I don't think I'm going to be able to change the actual size of the tables. Object designers. Form report. That's just queries. When you type your query, you can change the size of default text field size. That is just for the table design. Alright, I'm not going to be able to change that. Okay, anyway, that's just for queries. But anyway, so we're going to go and put in the volunteer table, we've got to put a stall ID field. So I'm going to open volunteer table, go to home and view, design view, and I put in stall ID. Now, stall ID in the stall table is, the field is, I'll go to home and view, design view. So I've opened the stall table and I look at design view and I see, okay, it's an auto number, which is a long integer there. So therefore the volunteer table, I've got to say yes, The volunteer table, I know it's messy, we've got to keep going into design view all the time. This stall ID, which has got a link to the other table, must also be a long integer. So in the stall table, your stall ID is a long integer. Therefore, in the volunteer table, the stall ID must be a number and also be a long integer. Even though in the stall table, stall ID is an auto number, if you want to make a copy of that field and link it in another table, so we have to use the stall ID in another table, which is the stall ID in the stall table. In the volunteer table, we're going to call it stall ID as well, but it must be a number data type, a long integer. Now remember, the vol ID is the auto number primary key. How do I know it's a primary key? Well, it was automatically put there as a primary key. If you want to change that, you go right click and untick primary key. So there's your primary key, right click and click on the key. The stall table, it was automatically put there when we created the table, the primary key, and we just changed the name. But if I want to remove the primary key, I'll right click and then it's gone. And then if I want to right click on it and I go put the primary key in again. If I want to put two fields as a primary key, I click on one, hold the shift key, click on the other, right click, and then put in my primary key. But obviously I don't want to do that. In this case, I only want one primary key. Now if you were going to use this scenario over here, then you would go and join these two as conjunctive primary keys. They call them conjunctive primary keys. So you're going to join them and right click and then make them both the primary key. If you're going to use this scenario, but we're not using this one, the three tables, we're going to use only two tables. So I've got my two tables now. You'll see I'll save my changes and you'll see what happens. Okay, where's the other table now? In my relationship diagram, I've got to go and add another table. It's disappeared. The way you do that is you right click and click on show table, and then you can then go and add that table. All right, obviously it is somewhere else around here. Oh, there it is. I was missing. Remember, you've got scroll bars. Okay, let's go put it back again. Now you'll see, and you can't really see very well probably, but you'll see that there's a store ID there now, and I can go and join that to that one. So you click on the one, hold the mouse down, drag, and then hover over the store ID in the other table, let go, and then you have to click on Enforce Referential Integrity. You have to click on that and click on Create. Now it works because the one-to-many, you can see there's a 1 and there's a little squiggly infinity sign there, which stands for many. And you have to join them if you want to get your marks for your database in your PAT. And you have to have a one-to-many relationship. That'll only work if the store ID in the store table is the same data type as store ID in the volunteer table. The store ID in the store table is an auto number primary key, but it's a long integer. It's matching store ID in the volunteer table is a number data type. It's a long integer. You cannot make this an auto number here. It has to be a number data type. It must be long integer. If it's short integer or any other type of number, you will not have your one-to-many relationship here. It must be an exact match of data types. And there you have it. So now we have our database, and I'm going to screenshot this, control print screen. Oh, for heaven's sakes. Why can't I find my control? Oh, there it is. Control print screen, or just print screen. Then you're going to go to your Word document for your phase 1, and then you can go and screenshot that relationship diagram into your database design section over here, and then you have to crop it, picture format, crop, and change the size so that it can be viewed properly. Then you write about it, describe what it means, And you also have to screenshot your tables. So you can do the same with these tables. Open the store table, go to Home, View, Design View, and screenshot that into your Word document to describe your tables or your data structures. Okay, so anyway, what I've compiled is this phase 1 Word document where you're going to go and enter all the details and make sure you fill that in properly. Now, we're doing the practical part. You can finish your phase 1 another time. So I know what my database looks like. All good to go there. We're now going to open Delphi and connect to the database. So we open Delphi, File, New, VCL Forms application. And save straight away. File, save all. It'll be stupid not to save. Hey. Where's my PAT? You don't have to use any specific name. You can just use the default names of the form, but of course you can change the name of the form for the caption at least over here. You know, fate or whatever you want to call it. Obviously have more of an imagination than I have. And then we also need a data module. So File, New, Unit, or no, not Unit, sorry. To get your data module, you go to File, New, and Other. When you connect to a database, you need a data module. Then you'll go to Delphi Files and find Data Module and click OK. Then we have this situation. And now you're going to call this file Save As. And you have to go, it's just one save. And then we're going to go put it in the same folder. And now it's quite a good idea to fate data module or something that you know, change that name. Fate data module, keep the .pas there. And now we've saved that in the same folder as this program over here. This program got nothing on it at the moment. We're going to get something on there soon. But before we do that, let's go and connect to our database. Well, this one here. We've got a store table and volunteer table. So what we're going to do is, on the data module, we'll go over here to our DBGo. DBGo, the T80 connection. Pluck one on there. Come on. Come on. Oops, my computer's moaning at me. I'm going to call this confate. Confate. Give it a name. Connection. Con for connection component. Fate for the name of my database, basically, because that is going to connect directly to the database. So I'm going to click on it, go to connection string, 3 dots, and then build, and use Jet 4.0. Go to next. It's very important you follow these steps very carefully. And enter or select a database name. So I'm going to click the 3 dots and find folder, and it does default because we saved this data module in the same folder where I have put the database. Okay, click on the database and click on open. Files in use. Oh my word. Right, so I'm going to have to close the darn thing. Say yes. Oops. Did I just use an expletive? I'm so sorry. Click on open. I have to close the database before I can actually go and connect it. And then, well, what I'm going to do is I tested the connection and then I'm going to remove the path. Now I hope this works. Sometimes it doesn't, and I obviously don't know as much as some people, and they might be able to help me. Test the connection, click OK, and click OK. Why did I remove the path? Hopefully it'll work when I want to take this whole folder and go and give it to the teacher. Then the database connection will still be there. But unfortunately, I found that even if you do remove the path, then it still doesn't keep its connection. In other words, it's still looking for the original file. When you go and navigate to the database on your computer, then it'll have a file path there. And after you test the connection, if you remove the file path, it should. I also removed the word admin here and clicked OK. Anyway, once you've done all that, go and click on this connection component. Make sure that the login prompt is not ticked. Everything else should be fine. Okay, connected. Maybe we should say connected true, hey? Maybe that's a good idea. Alright, that's something I haven't done before. I actually clicked on that true there for connected. Right, so that's the connection component. That connects directly to the database sitting in the folder. Now we want to put in ADO table components for the tables. We have 2 tables. I can go and open my database now. It'll be fine. Where is it? There it is. Inside that folder. Take note, the database is in the same folder as all the programs. When you open your database again, there'll be this. Make sure you enable content, guys. Right, so now I'm going to go put in ADO table components there. So I'm going to click on the ADO table component on the right hand side, pluck one for one table, another one for another table. I've got 2 tables, so I'm going to put in 2. Yes, you can disconnect and connect, but I'm just doing the simplest and way possible right now. So we've got this name, Conjunctive, and then we've got an ADO table over here, and I'm going to call this ADO table, I'm going to call it TBL stall. TBL stall. And this table, ADO table component here, the names are very important, so please make sure you have your names. Name property TBL volunteer. So TBL stall, TBL volunteer. Now, both these ADO table components must connect to this connection component here. So I'm going to click on that one and go find the connection component and say, okay, choose config. There we go. And then I'm going to choose the table name. So I'm going to go and choose the table name over here, stall. And then I'm going to choose the active property, true. Now if you do that in that order, everything will be fine. Do it again for the TBL volunteer, click on it, go to connection component, choose the connection component. There's only one. There's only one database. Remember, one connection component for one database. The ADO table components are for the 2 tables. So I'm on TBL volunteer, and I'm going to go to the table name property, choose volunteer, and then click on active true. So that's done. Now we're going to do the data source. We have to have a data source so that this data module can communicate with this main program. So this data module, we're going to go to the data access part over here. We're on the data module program, don't get confused. So we're going to put a data source next to that one and a data source next to that one. So we've got these 2. So far this is grade 11 work. Just now we'll put grade 11 also use queries. So it's very similar to the grade 11. I'm going to click on this data source here. That's got to connect to TBL stall. So I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it DSR TBL stall. In other words, making sure that I know that that is the data source that connects to TBL stall. This data source here is going to be called DSR TBL vol. I wish I used the word worker. TBL because it's easier to type. Volunteer. DSR TBL volunteer. So there's that one and there's that one. I've named them. This one must connect to this table, so I'm going to click on it and go to data set and choose the data set property, TBL stall. This one must go to that table, so I'll click on it, choose the data set, TBL volunteer. That's that done, but we're not finished yet with our data module because there's one more component we need, especially for if we want to have extra marks. We have to have a query component. Where do we find the query component? Go to DBGo and ADO query. So we click on that, pluck one of those in there. That's ADO query. We're going to call it a name. We've got to give it a name. We're going to call it Gr12 PAT. Query PAT. So I'm going to click on it and make sure I have the right connection component, and that's all you have to do. But we need a data source because when we run our queries in our main program, we want to see a display of the queries. So I'm going to click on data source there. On the data access, get that one on there, and I'm going to give it a name. DSR query PAT, Gr12 PAT. So I'm giving it a name because it's going to that one. And then the dataset property, I'm going to choose the query PAT. So you click on your data source, choose your data set. See, there's 3 now. I'm going to choose query PAT. So that's that done. Finish. Your data module's finished, all those marks. Then, oh wait, we must give it a name. Can you see it's called data module? I know we saved it as PAT data module. That's what it looks like inside the folder. See that one on that? That's our actual data module program. But we're going to choose the name property here. What are we going to call it in another program? We're going to call it DM PAT. So I've used the name there, DM PAT. And when you go to Unit 1, here, the main program, we're going to say with DM PAT do. In other words, DM PAT, we want to access this TBL component in our main program code. Then we use the name here that we've put there, DM PAT. Now, that's that done. Now, in the main program, before we can use this data module, we've got to go put it in our users section, right up top here. How come I can't get to? Okay, I can get to the top. We're going to go in the users here. Over here, I'm going to say DM PAT. Right. I hope I haven't paused. No. Okay, so that's that. And I'm actually going to stop this video and then we can carry on with the next one. So look out for the next episode of this